Hello and welcome to the UKEdChat After Hours webinar. Thank you for joining us. I'm Martin. You can find out more about me at ICT Magic on Twitter. I'm one of the people that makes UKEdChat happen every week on Twitter, and also I do lots of things behind the scenes on the website, on the magazine and that kind of thing. If you want to find out more about that, then if you head over to UKEdChat.com and you can find out lots more about it there. Tonight, I'm joined by one of our repeating guests now, I'm pleased to say. Fantastic performance last week, so thank you very much for that. I'm joined by Jen Morris. And Jen, if I can ask you to introduce yourself to those people who have not yet watched one of our webinars and haven't quite caught you yet. So where can people find you on Twitter, and what kind of classroom and subject you teach?
Well, as you said, I'm Jen Morris. I am lead practitioner in science, so I teach science in a secondary school. Everything that I do on Twitter is at Science Teach TW1, but no one ever knows how to spell it, so I'll type it in later on.
Okay, super. And if you are watching along to either the live performance or the repeat, then you should be able to find all of that information in the show notes. Just to let you know, if you are watching live, then there is the opportunity to be able to ask questions and to chat along with us in the sidebar. If you're watching a recording, or even if you're watching if you're listening to the podcast version of this, then again, if you just contact us on our various social outlets, and we'll get back to you, and every comment you make will be appreciated. So tonight we're talking about intervention strategies. Now, before we started recording, we actually had a bit of a discussion about the fact that we don't actually have all the answers for this. So we'll be very emboldened to the audience who are listening and watching to this to be able to help us out with some of these questions that we're talking about tonight. So you obviously as a secondary science teacher, and I've got a background in primary school teaching. Hopefully we'll cover lots of the bases, and we're obviously sharing our personal opinion with this, but really very much we want this to be an interactive discussion. So if you've got any comments and answers that you'd like to share with us, then please do that. So the first question really is a bit of a definition. So we're talking about the difference between what the role of differentiation is compared to what an intervention is. So how would you see that, Jen? What's the difference between those two different mainstays of the classroom?
So, I mean, I mentioned this earlier on the chat that I think that, you know, differentiation is a very sort of active process and is something that we do sort of second nature in the classroom constantly. And I think that intervention is much more reactive in terms of we look for a problem with data perhaps, and we look for problems with gap groups or achievement in any particular way really. And then we kind of react to that to then try to improve it. So that's the sort of differentiation between those two that I think fits best.
So going back to your role as a lead teacher in your particular subject of science, do you have some sort of coordination role within that you have to do when it comes to intervention and possibly even things like differentiation as well? How does that work in your team? What kind of role do you have as a team within that?
So I've only been at my school for the past 6 weeks. And so I haven't had anything to do with the intervention, particularly in this school. However, before I started there, I was Key Stage 4 coordinator at a different school. And there I had quite a big part to play in the intervention that went on with particularly year 11. And obviously the intervention was reactive for that whole process with the different mock data that we got. So we did Christmas mocks, and then we did a second mock, and our sort of intervention was based around reacting to what that was. And, you know, we did lots of different things. But as I sort of alluded to before, the classroom intervention is now something that in my new role will be much more important because my focus is teaching and learning. So what we're trying to avoid is having to react in the first place. So trying to get the differentiation correct, trying to get the classroom intervention correct so that there is less of, you know, the pressure towards the end of the year, especially at the moment, year 11, because this is what we're all thinking of at the moment, isn't it? Year 11 is the big focus.
Absolutely. And what kind of interventions are you seeing commonly in your own classroom and perhaps of the pupils, maybe in the wider school, from the cohort that you teach? What kind of interventions are quite common within your school?
So in my school currently, there are a number of different interventions going on. In lower year groups that are not in year 11, there are certain classes that are quite small classes of underachieving pupils. And there's possibly 8 in a class, and I teach one that's got 8 children in it. And they are in for core subjects, so maths, English and science. And they'll just have an extra lesson every 2 weeks. So what they will do in that lesson is some form of intervention. So, for example, at the moment, I'm doing maths in science because it's quite a big hot topic for the exams. So as long as they can get good at that in year 9, then hopefully that'll lead into them being good at it in year 11. Obviously, for year 11, there's a whole different set of strategies. So we've got after school revision that happens every Monday for an hour. At the moment, there is a particular subject that's led by a particular teacher. There are 3 different groups, a foundation, a higher and a triple. So obviously the 3 different teachers, but the subject would be the same. And what we're trying to move forward with after half term is, instead of teaching particularly just content, what we're aiming to do is teach a particular revision strategy. So for example, we might teach dual coding, or we might teach self-quizzing, and try to embed that over maybe a 2-week period, and then give them a bit of a toolkit by the end of it where they've had it modelled to them how to do that revision. And then we've also got the holiday revision that we're doing, which I'm going in on Tuesday over half term to help out some disadvantaged students. So we've got that going on. There's 4 teachers that are coming in to help do that, which is great. And we've also got some form intervention. So myself and the head of department will be taking 2 different groups once a week, and hopefully we're going to be able to boost their grades that way as well. So there is quite a lot going on at the moment.
Yeah, it's surprising from a primary perspective. I think we often think that the secondary schools don't take quite as much of a proactive approach to interventions as we probably do at primary school, and it's very much in the same kind of mold that you're describing there. So it's the idea of instilling those skills and strategies into pupils to be able to make sure that they are able to access the curriculum and obviously access what they're learning as well. And again, it is within those core subjects, probably not quite so much of the science, but certainly in the English and the maths. Obviously, they're very key skills to be able to access the other parts of the curriculum, especially at primary school. So my next question really is about how do we discover the fact that pupils actually need this intervention in the first place? Because some children are very good at hiding the fact they've got particular needs because of various different social pressures, perhaps, or peer pressures, and obviously it can be quite difficult to uncover the fact that they do actually have a need. So how do we uncover that, and what kind of tools are available to teachers to be able to help us do that?
See, I find at the moment that it's quite uncool to want to try. So I find it even more difficult actually to identify those students that need help, because they don't want to say that they need help, because then it's seen as being really uncool to do so. Because, you know, obviously that means that they're trying too hard. But there's also a massive stigma attached to those students that do want to that do have to, be, you know, intervened with, and those that are in lower sets. So you almost can't really win if you're in that position, you know, and it makes it difficult from a teacher's point of view. And I think that, you know, this is possibly one of the reasons that intervention is so reactive, because the main tool that we've got really is data analysis. And so obviously intervention, we get the data and then we react to the data, you know, as opposed to when it's differentiation, we kind of know what each student's needs are, whether they've got additional needs, or they've got, you know, some sort of social or emotional need. We know how to manage that in the classroom to help their progress, but then we need the data and the data analysis to then check if that differentiation is working, and then if not, that's when the intervention's being put in place. So I just think it's really hard. Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a difference again between primary and secondary, because obviously you have sporadic exposure to those particular students, where at primary school you tend to have the same class all the time. So obviously at primary school it is also data led, but I think it is much more reactionary to what you're seeing on an everyday basis, and it's much more done by observation, maybe informally within the classroom, much more. Because obviously you've got those students in your classroom in front of you all the time. If you identify a need, then you try to plug it straight away. So with the So how are interventions organised at secondary school? Are they do they tend to be as a group, like you said? So I don't know if you said it was timetable or if it was just a lesson which is in a break time or something like that. But how is it actually organised within the school? Perhaps staffing issues, and also how does that sort of fit into the timetable and resourcing as well? How does that all work?
So the one that I was talking about with those year 9 students, those are timetabled. So actually they will have that extra lesson in timetable time. So the effect really is that just gets put onto somebody's timetable. So realistically, there's not much of an effect on staffing or resources. I think that staffing might be a bit of an issue when it comes to revising over the holidays, perhaps because obviously not everybody wants to give up their time, which is completely fine. We probably would like to put on more intervention, but time, as I said before, is really tight with everything. And, time is the biggest barrier of learning and the biggest barrier of doing anything about intervention, which makes it difficult, which is one of the reasons that I'm so keen to discuss about this, because if anyone's got really efficient ways of doing this, I am 100% open, because I really would like some ideas, because I don't think we're getting it 100% right. I think we're doing a great job, but there's always improvement that could be made, and that collaboration could just be something that's the ticket to do that.
Yeah, and I think we both need to reiterate the fact that we don't have all the answers, and if the audience would like to suggest any ideas which are working really well within their schools, or things that they've seen in other schools, then that'd be fantastic to share, either in the comments if you're watching live, or also on social media if you're listening to this, if it's recorded. You mentioned about a little bit about revising and about home life. That sort of brings me on to the role of parents and how parents can play a role or not within intervention. So what kind of interactions have you had with parents about interactions? Probably not quite so much that as possibly a primary school teacher like myself would have had, because they're at the door pretty much every day at a certain age at least. Where I would imagine at secondary school it's much more of a hands-off approach unless there is a particular issue. So is there a more of a proactive way to reach out to parents for both secondary and primary and beyond, for that matter, to maybe get them more involved? And have you come across any good strategies which would help any teacher to be able to bridge that gap between the home life and school?
I think that parents are like a really sort of underused tool, especially in terms of intervention, because it's very rare that you'll meet a parent that doesn't say to you at parents' evening, how can I help? How can I help my child revise? And I mean, I'm talking about all the way through, how can I help my child be successful? It doesn't have to be just for year 11. I think the year 7s are a little bit more hands-on, but the further up school you go, the less hands-on, the parents are, just because the children are a little bit more independent. But I think that what we need to be focusing on is, making sure that those teacher relationships are really strong and that the contact with home is really regular. I do a lot of contacting home by email. I might ring the first time, and then after that I'll say, I'll contact you by email. And as long as there's that initial contact and the initial discussion, it bridges that gap really easily, because then it's not just a stranger, it's somebody you've actually had a conversation with that's talking about your child. So that parent then is much more engaged. I think what we need to do is to try to teach the parents how to support the children in a much more sort of hands-on way. I've the most recent parents' evening I've sat with, I've encouraged parents to ask children to prove what work they're doing, because revision wouldn't be invisible. So if the year 11, because it was a year 11 parents' evening, if the year 11 child is at home saying, oh, I've revised, then the parent needs to then say, well, what have you done? Show me what you've done, because there shouldn't be any invisible revision. And a lot of parents were like, excellent, thank you for that. And I put a timetable together to help them, and so each week now the parents know exactly what the child should be revising, and there are lots of strategies that they can ask to see, so they know just one little step more of how to actually help those children.
Yeah, and you've actually taken my next question off me, which was going to be about how can we be proactive and actually prevent interventions before they actually need to be instilled in the first place. So at primary school, obviously, we're always trying to minimize the amount of interventions that are going on, because it is such a disruption to the classroom. And I'm sure that it would actually be quite nice to be able to timetable something specific. But then you have the issue of, if you are studying one particular thing to try to level up or to try to improve something, you are possibly missing out on something else. And obviously you don't want to take break times away and lunch times away, because then it has a negative impact. It has that aspect that you're feeling like you're being punished. So the idea of trying to preempt and try to fix things before they happen is obviously really important. What does that look like in your subject specifically? Is there anything in particular that you can do through science to try to maybe preempt some of the possible issues which may come up later on? Obviously, being an experienced teacher, you know what kind of problems have come up before, which is what I would imagine. But are there any other things, or could you take that point further?
So I think, and I mentioned earlier again on the chat that I think that classroom intervention, teacher classroom intervention is the most powerful thing to avoid having a massive amount of intervention towards the end of a year. I think that what needs to happen is perhaps we need to identify a certain number of students that are in a particular disadvantaged group, for example, or boy group or whichever, somewhere where it links in with the school priorities, and pick some students in our classes that we are really going to absolutely, work really hard with. So we're going to make sure that they're the first people that we speak to in lessons to make sure they're understanding. We're going to, check their engagement, make sure that they've got as much access to any home resources and that they know how to use those resources. Spend that little bit of extra time just nurturing those students. And then once we find that there's an improvement there, not just ignore them again, but then choose some other students and work with those students. And I think that if we're sort of rotating this and doing this ourselves as teachers, I think that it's almost leveling up on differentiation, isn't it? Because there's more to differentiation than just, looking at different worksheets or, helping somebody in a classroom. It's also about making sure that you are kind of pulling up those students that really need it, but in a strategic way. There's no point sort of just plucking it in thin air and not measuring any impact. So once we measure the impact, then we're able to then move on. Okay, well, that worked. So let's try that with these 4 students. Let's try that with this 3 students. And I think that that's one of the most powerful things to avoid such a large amount of intervention towards the end. Also avoid that panic, because everyone's under pressure. Everyone's thinking, oh my God, if they don't get these grades, obviously it's terrible for the school if they don't achieve the grades that they should be achieving. It's also terrible for the children. And, more than anything, that's the thing that worries me, the fact that these poor children might end up leaving without any qualifications to be able to choose what they do in life. And that's I think what motivates me the most anyway as a teacher. But yeah, I think in classroom is definitely the most important part of this, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think it's really important what you said there about drip feeding when there isn't a huge issue at that point, and actually drip feed those resources and the allotted time as well, while you still have the chance before you have those big issues coming along, and then obviously the mad rush coming up to exam, but also obviously the end of the year pressures when you've got your students and you want to do wonderful things. Now you've got them where you want them, in a particular mindset and a particular mode of work. My last question tonight is about support staff. Now, at primary school, a lot of the interventions are done by support staff rather than the teachers themselves. I really personally don't like that approach, so I try to do most of the interventions myself and use support staffs, whether it's a TA or a HLTA, to be able to take the children who don't necessarily need particular input in that particular way, which then means that I can use my own expertise and my knowledge of the child to be able to hopefully push them on better than maybe a TA who works with lots of different children. But how do support staff work in secondary school when it comes to interventions?
So usually intervention would be teacher-led, and I think that for the most part it's initially because of the fact that there's very little funding for enough support to be able to do that. So those support staff are going to be there to help people with ECHPs and other additional needs. they're not able to then just take a small group to do one particular thing, for example, like you would be able to in primary. At this current school that I work at now, we offer an entry-level certificate for science, which is a level 1 qualification. And some of the students in my set are doing the ELC and some are not. And what happens when they're doing their mock exams is that the HTLA will take those children, instead of doing the mocks, because they're not being entered for mocks, for the actual exams, they're going to do this other qualification. So they take them out and they actually do some science work with them, which is working really well for those children because it's building the confidence. It's a small group. They have got a very good relationship with the learning support staff that they're with all the time. So that obviously really helps them. And that's actually the first time I've ever seen that in a school before. So I think that that's something that with resources, or with with enough resources, it would be really great to do. But again, if that wasn't the case, then there would be a struggle, because I'd have 10 children in that set and 3 of them would be doing a different qualification. So it would be quite difficult to manage without putting one group of them at a disadvantage. So I think that, that's really working for that.
Absolutely. And I just want to end by giving a quick shout out to all of the Senkos out there who do amazing jobs coordinating lots of the interventions which happen, I'm sure, at secondary as much as they do at primary, and the team that's around them as well. So a big shout out to all of the support, to all of the Senkos out there who do amazing work. But
Absolutely.
That is now the end of our webinar. So Jen, if you could just remind everybody where they can find you on Twitter and anything else that you want to share.
Yeah, I'm at ScienceTeachTW1 on Twitter.
Okay, and that will be in the show notes. I'm Martin. I'm ICT Magic on Twitter. You can find out more about me there. And if you just type in ICT Magic on Google, you will find me everywhere. And if you want to find out more about what UKEdChat is up to, then go to UKEdChat.com even, and find out more about what we're up to there. Thank you very much for watching or listening, however you're consuming us this evening. Thank you very much. Goodbye.